This is Steve Zeltzer with WorkWeek, and I'm with Terry Valen. He's with the National Alliance for Filipino Concerns. And we have this country where cruise ships are now stuck out in the ocean in Florida, off Florida, 2 cruise ships. And there was a cruise ship that came into the Bay Area, the Grand Princess. The passengers were left off of that ship, but many of the crew members are still on the ship. And many of them, of course, are Filipino and Ukrainian and Indian. And Terry has been involved in the fight to defend ship workers, and these crew is still off the docks of Hunters Point. So welcome to WorkWeek, Terry.
Thank you for having me.
So Terry, why don't you talk about this situation when you first learned about it and the problems and issues facing crew workers in the Grand Princess and other cruise ships?
Yeah, we first heard about it from our allies in labor, ILWU and the United Public Workers for Action. They reached out to us about this situation. We contacted Assembly Member Rob Bonta's office to see if we could get more information, because the ship, as we understood, like earlier in March, was held off of shore in the ocean off of San Francisco, and then they were trying to figure out where to dock it. And we were concerned because we knew a lot of the cruise ships, cargo ships, vessels around the world have a lot of Filipino seafarers on board. Up to a third, sometimes, of the crew is Filipino. On the Grand Princess, more than half, we found out, of the workers were Filipino. So 538 of the 1,100 crew members were Filipino. And there were concerns about the coronavirus spreading on the ship. And there was a lot of hand wringing about what to do with it. First, they wouldn't let it dock because they didn't want those numbers. I think Trump and Pence didn't want those numbers being added to the U.S. numbers at the time, which was low at the time. But these are people on board, the passengers and the crew, were people who were possibly infected. And we wanted to make sure that not only the passengers would be disembarked, but the workers would be taken care of as well. And some of the early communication from government officials didn't indicate that the workers would be let off. What we actually heard was, according to Mike Pence, that they were going to let the passengers off and then push the ship back offshore and have the workers quarantined on the ship, an infected ship. And so we weren't going to stand for that. We thought that was ridiculous that they would, continue to keep workers, are working hard on these ships to keep people fed, taken care of, entertained on these cruise ships. They shouldn't be treated this way as kind of second class or discriminated versus the passengers who they were going to let off. And there was already indication from some initial testing soon after they were in the bay that up to a half of almost 21 out of the 45 tests that were flown onto the ship by a helicopter indicated that there was COVID-19 infection. So, again, almost half of the tests were positive. And so there's clearly a problem, and the workers were a major concern of ours, Filipino and other workers as well.
And, of course, we had the experience of the Diamond Princess, which was docked in Yokohama. All the passengers and crew were kept on that ship in a quarantine, and it turned into a contamination, a Petri dish. And now we have the situation with an aircraft carrier, U.S. aircraft carrier, which has become contaminated. They first denied it, but now they're trying to evacuate some of the crew members, thousands of the crew members. You think that these crew workers are going to be able to have a quarantine? They've been on the bay in San Francisco for 2 weeks and be quarantined in a confined space in a ship that has already been contaminated.
Yeah, from the Diamond Princess experience, it was already clear, they were, both the crew and the passengers were quarantined for 4 weeks off the coast of Yokohama, Japan. And that caused the infections of 700 passengers and crew members out of a total of about 3,500 people or 3,700 people. So, 700 people infected, 80 Filipino crew members were infected, and 6 people died in the process of being quarantined for 4 weeks on that ship. The infection rate there was almost 20%. And when we saw the tests of passengers who came off of the Grand Princess, the infection rate was about 16 or 17%. They did 469 tests, and 78 of those tests of the passengers were positive. 100 crew members on that aircraft carrier that you were talking about off of Guam right now. And, so clearly there are higher rates of infection. The space is not suitable to quarantine people on board that ship. And that was already indicated by the Diamond Princess experience in February before all of this happened with Grand Princess in March. So they had that information, but they weren't acting quickly enough on that. Mike Pence promised every person on board would be able to get testing, and of course they didn't. So of the random or voluntary tests they did on the passengers getting off, again, it was almost 17% rate of infection. So hundreds of people were infected on these ships. The Diamond Princess, the Grand Princess, this aircraft carrier we're talking about. And so it's happening on ships around the world. And so people shouldn't be quarantined on those ships. In the case of the Grand Princess now, they've been on the ship for almost 4 weeks. And so it's coming on a month that the crew members have been left on board to, now they're supposed to be in quarantine. But, they were able to get some Filipino workers through some advocacy with us and others. 444 were repatriated to the Philippines. But even the conditions in the repatriation, they are put on buses and then loaded onto 2 planes in both the Diamond Princess and Grand Princess situation. And in those crowded planes, more people could get infected. They tested more passengers from the Grand Princess who showed no signs of being infected. They had no symptoms, fever or anything like that. And most of these people are just being screened. Do you have a fever? Do you have any of the symptoms? And some of those passengers who showed no symptoms, now of those tests, are being indicated that they are positive for coronavirus or COVID-19. And so asymptomatic people are also being infected and testing positive for COVID-19. And so this is not a situation where we need to be keeping people on board the ship, and also need to be more careful when they are repatriated, that they are all tested, that they're all given the treatment they need. They don't have to get on a plane back to their home countries until we are sure that they are not infected with COVID-19. And that's not happening right now. The way they're handling these ships, keeping especially the ones that are kept offshore or not allowed to dock, it's just increasing they're very likely to catch COVID-19 on these contaminated ships. And we have to get them off, and we have to take care of them no matter what's happening with kind of borders and people not wanting to. We have to take care of these people, both the passengers and the crew of all these ships.
And we're talking with Terry Valen. He's president of the National Alliance for Filipino Concerns. And Terry, there's some developments in the Philippines with these workers that were taken off or allowed to leave the Grand Princess. They've been organizing. And why don't you talk about their effort to communicate and a recent appeal that they made about not only their rights and protection to proper health conditions, but also the remaining crew people on the crew workers on the Grand Princess.
Yeah, they're very concerned about their coworkers that are still on board the ship. Again, I mentioned 444 crew members were allowed to go back to the Philippines. They were screened coming off the ship. Not all of them got tested. They were screened coming off the ship. They were loaded onto buses, about 10 buses to go to SFO airport, and 2 planes were chartered by the Philippine government to bring them back to the Philippines. Those conditions might have further exposed them to infection by COVID-19. And we know that some coming off the ship were taken to hospitals because they were infected already, and some, when they landed in the Philippines, were shown to have COVID-19. Again, not all of them were tested, but in the screening and then other health assessments, some of those crew members were infected. So they land in the Philippines, and they're quarantined at the New Clark City athletic facility in Pampanga and Tarlac in the Philippines. And we're learning this from our contacts through Migrante USA here, and then our colleagues at Migrante International back in the Philippines. There's also an International Seafarers Action Center, Philippine Foundation there. And they were in touch with the workers. We provided some Know Your Rights information because Migrante and ISAC have been doing this work for over 20 years. To let them know their rights, their right to be tested and get medical evaluations once they arrive in the Philippines. And what happened when they landed there was they were there quarantined in the facility, and they didn't have their luggage. The luggage was left on the cruise ship. I think most of the passengers, if not all, were able to take their luggage off of the ship. These seafarers, 444 of them, their luggage never got to them while they were quarantined back in the Philippines. There they also were talking about how once they leave quarantine, they were very concerned that they would be infecting their family members. They didn't know for sure if they were free of the coronavirus or were not infected by COVID-19, but they didn't want to go back to their home provinces and their families if there was still a question about, so they wanted testing. What they had been asking for the whole time was that they all get tested because of their prolonged and likely exposure to coronavirus and possible COVID-19 infection. So they wanted to know that they wouldn't infect their families and communities when they go home. And also that parts of the Philippines are on lockdown right now. You can't go and leave Manila, or you can't go around Manila right now. So some of the workers, seafarers who got back to the Philippines, their quarantine ended just this last Sunday on March 29th. And heading back to their home provinces, it's difficult to travel through the Philippines. Some of them were stopped at checkpoints and held for another 14 days. They were told that this piece of paper that they were given as they left quarantine was not accepted, so they have to be quarantined for 14 more days to make sure they were not going past certain provinces or checkpoints where they're trying to prevent the spread of COVID-19. So they've been experiencing all of this. They haven't seen compensation from Princess Cruises, who owns the Grand Princess cruise ship, and the Philippine government, which has an assistance to nationals or overseas workers welfare administration funds that can help Filipino overseas workers who are in these kinds of situations. They haven't seen that compensation or financial assistance they need as nationals overseas in this desperate situation. So we're continuing to work with them to press for these demands that they have. They sent an open letter to the Philippine government, the manning company that recruited them, and to Princess Cruises to make sure that their needs are taken care of, from their health to the financial needs that they'll have moving forward given this situation, and making sure that also, like you mentioned, the crew members who are still on board are also taken care of, tested, treated, given the financial assistance and even the accommodations they need, because we know that probably they may not be able to get on a plane back to the Philippines. There's an April 14th. Until then, there's a ban on international travel to the Philippines and to other countries. There's so many nationalities on board. We heard possibly 54 different nationalities working on board. All of these workers need to be accommodated. If their quarantine ends this Sunday or Saturday on April 4th, then where are they going to stay? Who's going to pay for that to take care of their additional healthcare needs and their accommodations while they're waiting to be able to go back home safely?
Well, we have a lot of empty hotel rooms in San Francisco that probably could be used to keep these crew members. But the other thing, that there was a video from the Indian members of the crew, 129. Why don't you talk about that?
Yeah, we heard about a Facebook post, of some Indian workers on board, from South Asian workers who were appealing. They wanted to get off the ship and they wanted to go home. Now we're hearing of this, recorded messages from people on ships around the world. The aircraft carrier mentioned, and others, people, desperate, both workers and passengers, to get off of the ship. Even captains of ships, asking for help. They feel stranded a lot of times. So the Indian Seafarers released that video on March 14th when we did that press conference with you and others from ILWU, where they were appealing to get off the ship as well, appealing to their Indian government or anybody who would help them. And so we also got in touch with local community groups that we had worked with before on immigrant rights and workers' rights. So the Alliance for South Asians Taking Action, they reached out to the Indian workers that are on board and posted that video on Facebook. We got in touch with a couple of them through the International Transport Workers Federation, the ITF Federation local inspector here in Northern California. They were just came on board and came back to the Bay Area and reached out to those Indian workers as well, passed on their email address. And so we're in touch with some of them. We know that their situation is probably going to be similar, given there's a travel ban to India, as far as we know. So those workers, the Filipino workers, all the workers still on board, I think there's still several hundred manning the ship right now, need to be taken care of. They need to be tested, treated, accommodated with healthy and safe accommodations while they're waiting to get back home. And so we're trying to get in touch with them and, make sure that they and all of the workers on board are taken care of.
And we're speaking with Terry Valen again. He's with the National Alliance for Filipino Concerns. It seems like this is an international issue. Crew members and passengers all over the world face a terrifying situation of not being able to get off these ships. What can people here in the United States and the Bay Area do to demand that they have human rights, that they're human beings, and they need to be protected like everyone else? What can they do?
Yeah, we've been sharing the story, and we hope to do another press conference soon. The workers are about to get off. The remaining workers, or some of them, again, maybe getting off this weekend after their 14 quarantine ends this Saturday, I think April 4th. So that we expect the ship will dock somewhere here in San Francisco. We're trying to get that information. We're asking our local elected officials, the Philippine consulate, those responsible for taking care of the ship and dealing with this crisis on this cruise ship that's in our backyard here in SF Bay area, to give us all of the information we need to make sure those workers are being taken care of. There's not a lot of transparency right now on the condition of the workers, how many workers are infected, what's the plan for the ship, are they all going to be disembarked this time and the ship decommissioned? We need all of those answers to make sure that we know that this is being handled properly. We know there's more dire situations happening around the world, so this is the opportunity for the Bay Area and U.S. government officials, the Philippine consulate, and all of the consulates dealing with this international situation to take responsibility for this situation and take care of the workers that are still on board and anybody who's left on these cruise ships or ships all over the world. Literally, we hear they're stranded or imprisoned on these ships, not able to dock and unload. So we'll probably be doing a press conference very soon, and they've been sharing the story around the world for people to also raise their voices in together with these workers who have already pressed their demands forward, having been the workers who've been repatriated, and those workers that are still on board, I'm sure, want to make sure that their needs are taken care of. So I want everybody to join kind of the calls on our government officials and the Princess Cruises and all of the cruise companies to handle these ships properly and take care of everybody, not just the passengers, but the workers, and treat them fairly, treat them well. This is time for all of us to come together across the borders to handle this properly. So we'll let folks know through the media and social media efforts that we have while we're all locked down and sheltered in place, that there's still things we can do and make calls to all of the officials responsible for this and the cruise companies themselves.
And how can people get to you at your website? Do you have a website?
Yeah, they can reach out to us I'm at the National Alliance for Filipino Concerns, or NAFCON. So they can email info, I-N-F-O, at nafconusa.org. That's N-A-F-C-O-N. So info at nafconusa.org. We also have, Facebook if you want to reach us that way and follow some of this campaign. And it's NAFCON USA on Facebook. And our website is www.nafconusa.org.
Okay, well, I want to thank you very much. We've been talking with Terry Valen again. He's president of the National Alliance for Filipino Concerns. Thanks for joining us on WorkWeek, Terry.
Thank you, Steve.